I am Kimberly, the 5-Minute NP. The 5-Minute NP was born out of my belief that small, incremental changes can drastically change the trajectory of your life. Our genes do not have to determine our lifespan. My goal through this podcast is to act as a roadmap that bridges the gap between knowledge and action, leading to you living your healthiest, happiest, longest life. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. Hello everyone. There has been a lot of talk about longevity these days and how we can possibly stop the aging process. Well, Novoslabs is unlike any other company that provides anti-aging supplements. They're the only ones who have used evidence-based science to create the best nutraceuticals to extend human lifespan by targeting the 10 known mechanisms of aging. They not only focus on extending lifespan. Through their blog, they provide unbiased information and resources that help us improve the quality of our life and the amount of years we live healthy and disease-free. Chris Mirabile, the CEO and co-founder of Novoslabs, joins me to further discuss those mechanisms of aging and how Novos is targeting them specifically, and how certain nutrients, fasting, diet, and exercise can truly impact human longevity and health span. He discusses why we shouldn't overconsume antioxidants. He provides evidence for or against using Metformin, what biohacking is, and the importance of lowering our blood sugar, and a lot more. I learned so much in this interview, and I know you will too. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. Thank you for being here. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. My goal is to truly help you live healthier, happier, and longer. Enjoy this episode. Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to our conversation today. And I thought we would just start with learning a little bit more about you and your background and what brought you here.
Sure. I have a long story that I'll try to keep short. So I've always been interested in health. Ever since I was 12 years old, I picked up an issue of Men's Health magazine, and I was inspired by that. And so I started exercising and eating what I thought at the time was a healthy diet, which was the, low-fat, high-protein diet, which I've since come to learn is not ideal for longevity. But then I was stopped in my tracks. When I was 16 years old, I was suddenly struck by a seizure, which was the result of a brain tumor that was unexpected. And going through that experience really opened up my eyes in many ways in terms of what I wanted to derive out of life from a more general level, but from more specifically and relevant to Novos. It added a dimension of interest in health. In other words, prior to that, I was interested in health for more superficial reasons, like athletic performance and to be in good shape and to look good. But for the first time, I started to think about health in terms of the biology of health. Like, how can I avoid disease and getting a brain tumor again or something else? And how can I live as healthy as I can and feel as good as possible for as long as possible? And so that was like a seed that was planted in me that has, over the years, eventually matured into what is now Novos. And so I've been an entrepreneur for many years. I've started typically technology companies in all different industries, from social media to financial technology to commercial real estate technology. But I've always been this health nut, so to speak, and doing research and self-experimentation or biohacking. And finally, I had the opportunity to collaborate with a number of scientists and medical doctors, and then eventually to start what is now Novos.
Wow, that's really cool. Let's hear about Novos. I know you are the CEO and co-founder, correct? And so I just thought we would learn a little bit more about the company for those people that don't know about it, what you do, your mission, philosophy, and all the experts you have behind it.
Sure, yes. So our vision is to extend humanity's lifespan. Now, to get there, we might have to change the messaging a little bit. And so, for example, what we really emphasize for consumers is to be younger for longer, which is essentially what you are doing when you are slowing down the aging process by addressing the causes of aging, which we'll, I'm sure, get into more detail about. You are optimizing how you feel today, and you extend your health span and your lifespan as well. And so how do we go about doing this? Well, to that point about the mechanisms or hallmarks of aging, we, as a team, myself and the scientists and my co-founder, who's a medical doctor in the longevity space, agreed that the best approach would be to try to address all of the causes of aging, or the known causes of aging, simultaneously, which no company had been doing prior. So a little bit of background, when I realized I wanted to get into the longevity biology space, it wasn't exactly clear what I could do and how I could make a contribution. As I mentioned earlier, most of my experience was in technology, and for that it was mostly consumer technology, not B2B. And so I started networking with scientists in the space and asking questions and digging into the research. And what became immediately apparent to me was that all of the companies in the space that were really doing something significant were biotech companies. So they were creating these more invasive therapies, anything from like DNA editing to inventing entirely new molecules that target one or two of the mechanisms of aging. But nobody was really creating something that I could use today, that I could give to my friends, my family, my loved ones, or the community at large to address aging today. And the best companies out there that were coming close were still very, very far away. And so that's when the idea came to mind, to try to create something that uses natural substances that won't require testing and FDA approval, but that have significant research behind them addressing these hallmarks of aging. And that's exactly what we did in collaboration with the scientists that we work with.
Wow. Honestly, it's really cool. Just your website, I'll just give it to you, and your blog, and there's so much information, and it's just, I've read so much of the stuff. It's amazing how much you guys are covering, and all the different, it's very thorough, and just, it's really a great site. I really encourage people to go to the site. It's awesome. So I thought, let's just kind of start with, obviously there's what 9 different mechanisms of aging or hallmarks of aging. But if you could just briefly touch on the ones or whatever that you're specifically targeting with these interventions and supplements, maybe just to give a broad understanding of why we age.
Sure. So just a very quick background. So the 9 mechanisms of aging, these were uncovered in a seminal paper in the journal Cell a number of years back, where they analyzed, it was a meta-analysis of hundreds of other scientific papers, and they were able to identify the commonalities across these papers and then categorize them into 9 mechanisms or hallmarks of aging. So these are the things that they have understood are biological processes that essentially go wrong and lead to a compound effect that can then lead to aging. And as we well know, as you get older and older, the effects of aging kind of accelerate. It's somewhat of an exponential curve, right? Now, there's 9 of them identified in that paper. We go as far as saying 10 mechanisms of aging, because it's been a number of years, and many scientists believe that there's actually a little bit more to it than that. So I'll quickly mention all 10 of those, and then if there are any that you want to dig into, I'm happy to. So it ranges from mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence, loss of proteostasis, altered intercellular communication, genomic instability, so that's things like DNA damage, epigenetic alterations. This is made very popular by people like Dr. David Sinclair of Harvard, who wrote the book Lifespan. Telomere shortening, the end caps of the DNA that protect the DNA, but they get shorter as you age. Deregulated nutrient sensing, the ability to sense the nutrients like carbohydrates or fats or proteins or even alcohol, and being able to process that properly and have a strong metabolism. Stem cell exhaustion. So these are the cells that produce new cells, new tissues, and by extension, feed into the organs. And then the 10th one that we have added to that is cross-linking. And cross-linking is something that can be caused by the process of, for example, glycation. So like sugar molecules can attach to cells and then cause those cells to no longer function properly, and by extension, the tissues and organs no longer function properly. Things like arterial stiffness can be caused by cross-linking, skin wrinkling can be caused by cross-linking, and so on.
Wow. So that's why we need to avoid sugar?
It's one of the reasons, yeah. So, or at least keep your blood sugar as low as possible. Everyone reacts differently to different types of foods, but yes.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about blood sugar. I know it's huge. So which one that's a lot of different things that can go wrong as we age.
Right.
Now, those who do follow Dr. David Sinclair, they know that he views aging as a disease. Do you share that view that it is a disease and something we can truly slow or reverse?
Yeah, the quick answer is yes, I do believe it's like a disease. The longer answer is I think we need to be careful in the sense of characterizing people who are older as being in a diseased state, so to speak. But the process itself, if it's something that can be eventually avoided or reversed, and that the process itself leads to illness, things like cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, osteoporosis, sarcopenia, the list goes on. If these things are the result of the aging process, and it is something that can be mitigated, then yes, in the traditional definition, I would categorize it as a disease. But it also depends on how far into it that you're in, that you are, right? Do you have these illnesses? If you don't have the illnesses and you're 70 years old, I wouldn't go as far as saying that you're diseased, right? But the process of aging, I think you can say is a diseased state that increases the likelihood of illness.
And how much does epigenetics play a part in aging as far as getting diseases? And I guess those are people that don't really know what epigenetics is. Could you just briefly explain that a little bit, and how much of an influence the choices that we make and how we live affect our ability to, change that, direction of our aging process, I guess?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, 10 different mechanisms of aging. What I didn't mention was that some of them might have more significant impacts on aging than others. One of those mechanisms that is believed to have a more significant impact than others, not necessarily the most, but there's reason to believe maybe it is the most, is epigenetics. So epigenetics are essentially epi being Latin derived and denoting a layer, right? So the layer on top of your genome is essentially your gene expression. So imagine if your genes are piano keys, and then the epigenome is which keys are being pressed and relieved. So the music of your genes, so to speak. It's how they're expressing themselves. And so to your question about environment and lifestyle, the age-old expression nature versus nurture. So nature is the gene, and then nurture is the lifestyle, and is essentially related directly to the epigenome. So in other words, a quick, simple, practical example. If you go out in the sun and you get UV radiation, your body starts to tan, your body produces more nitric oxide, there are neurotransmitters that are produced that then lead to elevated mood. All of these things are happening almost programmatically, right? Certain genes are turning on, certain genes are turning off. Some genes to protect you and to repair DNA damage and so on. And so that is the epigenome responding to the environment. So literally everything you do is in one way or another impacting your epigenome, from the foods you eat to the amount you sit versus walk to how much sleep you got, so on and so forth. And so this is pretty much like the idea of lifestyle and having a healthy lifestyle, having like a very direct impact on one of the more significant mechanisms of aging is the epigenetic expression. So happy to, at some point, if you're curious, to go into like what are some of the things that can most favorably impact the epigenome. But just imagine you have certain genes that could potentially have a negative effect on you, like maybe some obesogenic genes, so genes that are more likely to make you overweight. Well, there are things you can do to reduce the likelihood that those genes are activated. Same thing with cardiovascular disease, so on and so forth. That's not to say that every single gene is something that can be favorably impacted. Like if you're born with Down syndrome, unfortunately, you can't eat your way out of that. But there are a number of different genes, most I would say, that can be favorably impacted by lifestyle.
I'm happy to go through that now or later. I'm eager to talk about lifestyle changes, obviously. But either way, I thought we could also mention, I've been reading a lot about DNA methylation. Is this also something important to know about as far as the lifestyle choices that we're making, how it affects that?
Yeah, so DNA methylation is the process of adding a methyl group to the DNA or removing a methyl group from the DNA, and that is essentially the epigenetic expression. So the methylation process is what leads to your epigenome expressing itself, like turning genes on or off. There are different foods that can have favorable effects on your epigenome through the process of methylation, because what you need is what's called methyl groups. You need methyls to be able to, these molecules, to be able to express themselves or to methylate the DNA. And so there are different foods that have more methyl groups than others. Like, for example, one of the best food sources for methyl groups is choline. And choline comes from, one of the best sources of choline is egg yolks. So, as much as so many people believe, like, avoid egg yolks, only have the egg whites. No, actually, I'm completely against that. You should have the full egg. You should have the egg yolks. That's where the nutrients are, including vitamin D and other vitamins. But it also includes choline, which is very important for methylation. It's also important for other reasons. It contains, choline leads to the production of phosphatidylcholine, which is something that essentially insulates nerves, and it can lead to better nervous system health. And it can also be used for the production of acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter, which is used in the thinking process and the memory process and in nerve function. So, for example, exercise uses acetylcholine. So choline is extremely important. Most people are deficient in it, and it's one of the best sources of methyl groups. You could also get it from cruciferous vegetables, lentils. If you go online and you search for best food sources for methylation, you can find lists on Google pretty easily.
Well, what about, I know I was going to talk about it later, but might as well jump in with it. What I've heard, I was reading about liver. Like, there's a lot of talk about eating liver. Is that important? And then there's other research, I think, that says, avoid meat, avoid red meats. I thought we'd just talk a little bit about that and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is a controversial topic. It's one that I don't think is 100% fully resolved when you get as specific as organ meat. I will say that I personally do have some organ meat in my diet. I do it on occasion. The reason for organ meat is that it has the highest concentrations of nutrients, I believe, out of any food out there in the diet, right? It's the reason why, if you look at carnivorous animals, when the animals at the top of the food pyramid, the more predatory animals like lions and tigers, they always attack an animal and go for the organs, and then they leave the muscle meat for the lower species, if you will, right? Now, we're typically eating that muscle meat, but we're not the lower species, right? Like the liver, the kidneys, I'd go as far as saying the brain and the eyes, though I don't personally eat those, but many cultures... Yeah, many cultures do. They're very high in the nutrients that, believe it or not, actually impact those organs, right? Like, you get like a lot of phosphatidylserine and phosphatidylcholine from the brain, for example. And so that's the rationale, the logic behind eating organ meats. They're very, very nutrient dense. In terms of animal products versus plant products, there's a fair amount of research that indicates that animal products are not ideal for longevity purposes. That doesn't mean you need to cut out all animal products. I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan. I do eat animal products, but I tend to try to eat fatty fish as much as possible for my protein source. I have tons of vegetables in my diet. I have beans. I have mushrooms in my diet. And these are found to be associated with the longest lifespans. If you look at the longest lived people in the quote unquote blue zones across the world, you find that their diets consist of mostly vegetables, a modest amount of animal products, which tend to be fish, eggs, maybe hard cheeses, and not much of the red meat for a number of different reasons, that as well as not much milk as well. Cheese, yes. Milk, no.
Okay, I was going to ask you about milk. I read some on your blog. Talk about milk and how it ages us, and this IGF-1 growth factor. I'm a little confused on it. I read you want to avoid the milk because it raises it, but then other research has shown you want to raise it? I'm confused, so I'm hoping you can clarify that.
Sure. So I think this is a good segue into a advanced sounding topic that's actually relatively simple. It's called antagonistic pleiotrophy. So antagonistic pleiotrophy is a big word for the simple idea that what's good for you today can actually come back to harm you tomorrow. And as I mentioned before, sun exposure, that's one example of that. You can go out in the sun, you can get vitamin D produced from that and nitric oxide, but you're also causing DNA mutations. And those DNA mutations over time, if they accumulate, can lead to a significantly increased likelihood for melanoma or skin cancer, right? So bringing it back to milk and other animal products for that matter, if you're overactivating different biological pathways like mTOR being a growth pathway, it's producing new cells, for example. It does a number of other things, but that's one thing that it does. If you're overactivating this, you can lead to accelerated aging. IGF, insulin-like growth factor, is something that might, in the short term, make you feel younger, look younger in the mirror. You hear similar things about growth hormone, GH. A lot of celebrities get these things injected, and it's going more mainstream now. And yes, it might make you feel younger or look younger in the short term. The question is, what does it do in the long term? And a lot of research in many different species, including humans, has nearly definitively, almost nothing's definitive in science, but nearly definitively shown that higher levels of IGF and growth hormone, especially when it's super physiological, so you're going beyond what your body is naturally able to produce, it actually shortens lifespan. There's a number of different theories for it, but it's also one of the reasons why when you look at something like fasting extends lifespan, because when you fast, you turn off mTOR production, for example. You activate something called AMP kinase. There are these different biological processes that turn on. Autophagy, which is like protein and cellular cleanup, right? Like cleaning up the mess in our cells, so to speak. When you're in a constantly fed state, and especially when that food is very stimulatory of IGF and growth hormone and so on, you're on this always on biological process, so to speak, right? And you're never turning it off and cleaning up and kind of regrouping before you turn things back on again. Now, some of your more savvy listeners might say something like, well, yes, but when you fast, your IGF levels skyrocket when you start to eat again. Yes, that's true, but it's a very short period of time. And what's more important is to look at the area under the curve, right? So how low was your IGF and your growth hormone during that period of fasting? And then that sudden spike, like how much of a spike was that relative to the period that there was no growth hormone and IGF? And the answer is it's significantly less IGF and growth hormone. Plus, these other processes were being engaged during that process.
Okay, so yeah, that makes sense. So basically with, those that don't really know about these aging pathways, you want to inhibit mTOR and activate AMPK, right? And then I would also think you would want to decrease insulin and blood sugar. Is there anything else, just to kind of summarize that we're trying to do by the things we're talking about?
Yeah. So it's not to say that mTOR is always bad, right? Like mTOR serves its function. Like biology is very smart. Everything has its own function. The question is, what is the ideal to extend lifespan? Keep in mind that evolution isn't incentivized to make us live a very long time. Evolution is incentivized to get us to procreate and to make sure the species survives. And then evolution doesn't give a damn what happens to us after that, right? So that's why like 20 to 30 is our prime, and then things start to go downhill from there. So the question is, what can we do to set up the proper scenario circumstances to minimize the chances something goes wrong, and then maximize the chances that things go right? So that point about mTOR, yes, it's better in general if it's less activated than what the amount most people activated, especially with Western diets. AMP kinase, we want that to go up. Insulin, we don't want to overactivate. There are cases where you want some, like after exercise, insulin can be good for growth of muscle, but generally speaking, you don't want that activated throughout the course of the day unless after exercise. And blood sugar as well. Now, blood sugar goes up when you exercise because your muscles need the sugar. But if it's coming from food, then that's a problem. If it's constantly elevated regardless of food, for example, you wake up fasted and your blood sugar is elevated, that's a sign of dysregulated nutrient sensing, one of the causes of aging, and essentially it's potentially a sign of diabetes, type 1 or type 2.
I guess we could talk about metformin real quick, because I know it's a lot in the research beyond just for type 2 diabetes. What are your thoughts on metformin? I know a lot of people are taking it for longevity purposes, so maybe you could just mention what metformin is, why people would be taking it for that reason.
Sure. So metformin is a drug prescribed for type 2 diabetes. It's been around for a long time. It's now available in generic form. It's no longer under patent. It's an interesting pharmaceutical drug for the sake of longevity, because there was a study done where they looked at thousands and thousands of people in the United Kingdom who were taking metformin as diabetics. And then it looked at people who were taking different drugs as diabetics. And then it also looked at non-diabetics. And it found that the diabetics taking metformin lived longer than those other two cohorts. So the question is, how could someone who is diseased with type 2 diabetes, who always have shorter lifespans, without the metformin at least, how could they live longer than otherwise quote unquote healthy people who aren't taking the metformin? And it's something that we don't have a clear answer for yet. There's a study that will likely cost tens of millions of dollars that's looking for funding to try to investigate this and to have a more definitive answer. What I would say to it is that metformin is what's known as a dirty molecule. It's something that we don't fully understand how it functions. It has a lot of different effects in different ways. One of the things it does is it has a toxic effect on mitochondria. So the mitochondria being the power plants of your cells, this is what's taking the foods that you eat and generating energy and giving your cells the ability to perform their function. It's having a slightly negative effect or toxic effect on the mitochondria. So that sounds bad at first, but what we then need to introduce is the concept of hormesis. So hormesis is the idea that when you have a little bit of stress, the body comes back stronger. You see that through exercise. When you lift weights, your muscles get bigger, slowly but surely. If you lift too much weight, you can tear a muscle. Same thing with hormesis. If you have too much of a toxin, you can damage your body. But if you have a little dose of it, your body comes back stronger. And one of the beliefs about metformin is that it's causing a little bit of toxicity in the mitochondria, which leads to the mitochondria being a little bit stronger and therefore better able to keep blood sugar lower, for example. And by extension, this can potentially lead to a healthier outcome. Now, we don't know for sure. We don't know how well it will work for otherwise healthy people. It works well for unhealthy people, but what about healthy people? Other things we don't know is, for example, how to handle it if you exercise. So there was a study done where they found that people who take metformin while exercising actually have fewer benefits derived from that exercise. And so I personally exercise a lot. I run, I lift weights. And so although I had experimented with metformin a little bit in my past, I've stopped taking it altogether. And I take Novos instead for a number of reasons.
Mm-hmm. What are some, I know Berberine's been talked about a lot when similar to metformin. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about Berberine or other alternatives to metformin that maybe we could get some of the benefits that aren't from that prescription drug?
Sure. So Berberine specifically, we're kind of cautious about. So it's a natural ingredient. That's why a lot of people are interested in it. But Berberine is technically the type of molecule is an alkaloid, and alkaloids are oftentimes quite toxic compounds. So we're cautious about it. We're not concluding that it doesn't have a beneficial effect, but there's not enough research, and for that reason, we as a company and as an individual, me personally, I avoid Berberine.
What I want to talk about what the top supplements are that you are super excited about to slow aging. Which ones do you know the most about, or that you're excited to share about?
Sure. So I will give the disclaimer that most of the ingredients that I'm going to share happen to be in our Novos Core or Novos Boost formulation. And it's not by accident. We spent a lot of time working with, you asked me before about the scientific team and I forgot to mention it, but we have a scientific team of renowned longevity scientists, biologists, geneticists from Harvard, MIT, the Salk Institute, University of Liverpool, and so on. People like Dr. George Church, who invented the first gene sequencing method in the 1980s. He's a professor at Harvard and MIT. We're dealing with people who are definitely domain experts. And together with my co-founder, Dr. Kris Verburgh, who is a published author in longevity, this is his area of expertise. We've come up with our formulation for Novos Core and Novos Boost. We looked at thousands of studies for multiple different ingredients, and we narrowed it down to 13 ingredients, 12 of them in Core, and 1 is in Novos Boost as a booster. So Novos Boost, I'll start with that. It's the simplest, contains NMN, that stands for nicotinamide mononucleotide. This has become very popular because of the work of Dr. David Sinclair, who studies it, finds a lot of beneficial effects in its ability to slow down or reverse aging, or at least symptoms of aging, in many different species. For example, in mice, there's a viral YouTube video where you can see like a mouse on NMN running on, equivalent of a treadmill, like a marathon, and the other mouse just laying down, and the hair color is more bright and vibrant and fluffy than the other mouse. So NMN is in Novos Boost. Novos Core, we've got 12 ingredients that together is the first formula to ever address all 10 of the mechanisms of aging that I was mentioning earlier. So some of the more exciting ingredients, one is fisetin. So fisetin is something that you can find in strawberries. It has senolytic or senostatic effects. So cellular senescence is one of the causes of aging I mentioned earlier. Cellular senescence, imagine a senescent cell as being like a zombie cell. So it's not performing its function. It's not living nor dead. It's only secreting inflammatory molecules that then cause neighboring cells to also become senescent. So similar to what you would expect a zombie to do, right? And so when you have just a few of these cells in tissue or in an organ, it can dramatically decrease the ability for that organ to really function properly. It's another reason why our skin wrinkles, for example. And so fisetin is a really promising ingredient in that capacity. We have glucosamine sulfate. So a lot of people think of glucosamine in relation to joint health, and although it definitely has that effect, it's actually one of the only substances that was found in a very large study that's available over the counter to have a positive effect on human longevity. And so looking at thousands of people, it was found that people who had glucosamine sulfate in their diet lived longer lifespans for all-cause mortality. I believe if you dig deeper into the science, I believe it was correlated to improved heart health. Another interesting ingredient is lithium, but in a microdose. So when you think about lithium, a lot of people think of the larger dosages that you find in the psychiatric setting, right? In that case, you're talking 500 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams. What we're talking about is 1 milligram. So 1 milligram is something that you can get in a healthy diet. So for example, salmon contains lithium in it. A lot of plants contain lithium in them. Many different natural water sources. For example, San Pellegrino water is a great source of natural lithium content. You can get 0.5, 1, 2 milligrams of lithium in a very healthy diet. And there are societies around the world who actually have higher amounts of lithium in their diet. And what some studies have found is that those people have lower rates of suicide, lower rates of depression, lower rates of bipolar disorder. And then in other studies, we found in animals that it can reduce the risk of Alzheimer's, dementia, and so on. So lithium is a promising ingredient that also happens to have a nice effect on the epigenome. There's a handful of others that you can find on our website.
there's a lot of talk about resveratrol and but you guys are more in favor. I'm not going to say this right. You probably know it. You can Pterostilbene.
Yeah, good.
Talk a little bit more about that and why you favor that over resveratrol.
Sure. So pterostilbene is very similar to resveratrol. The molecule is almost identical, slightly different. Resveratrol is sourced from grapes. That's one of the best sources for it. And if people think about going back a number of years, the French paradox and the question of why do French people, despite their diet, live longer lives, the theory at the time at least was because they drink red wine. Red wine contains resveratrol, and maybe that is extending lifespan. It's actually where Dr. David Sinclair got a lot of his experience earlier on in his career was with resveratrol. But it's been found that, first of all, wine has minuscule amounts of resveratrol. You would need to drink like a barrel of wine a day, right, to get enough of it. And resveratrol hasn't really lived up to the initial hype that it had. Part of the reason is that it's not absorbed that well in the gastrointestinal tract. Another reason is that it doesn't have a very long half-life in the bloodstream, right? So pterostilbene, by comparison, has significantly higher or better absorption in the gut, pterostilbene being sourced from blueberries, and it has a 7 times longer half-life than resveratrol does. And so there's a fair amount of research related to pterostilbene and the possible beneficial effects in between resveratrol, which is very popular, and pterostilbene. We decided to go with the pterostilbene because of the research.
Okay. And what about this other one I wanted to ask you about, alpha-ketoglutarate? Why do we want to take that? And that's in the combination too, right?
Yes. So alpha-ketoglutarate is it's involved in the Krebs cycle, which is the process that takes place within the mitochondria, and it's for the energy production. You might remember from high school biology, the Krebs cycle, and so. As you get older, you have less and less AKG. It can actually fall as much as tenfold when you get into your more senior years of life. There are different things that you can do to try to increase the amount of AKG in your body. For example, fasting and exercise have been shown to not only promote longevity, but also increase alpha-ketoglutarate in your body. But it's not typically found in a normal diet. And so we include AKG in our formula. Again, it's something that we naturally have in human biology, but we start losing it as we get older. And there are some studies that found, for example, in mice, it increased lifespan by 12%, and it increased the health span of these mice, so the period that they lived disease-free, by 41%. And specifically, the calcium form is the best form for longevity, and that's the form that we include. We have 1,100 milligrams of calcium alpha-ketoglutarate in 1 packet of Novos Core.
Wow. What about quercetin? I've read a lot about quercetin. I know all through COVID, heard a lot about quercetin. I mean, I was taking it. How do you feel about that? And is that similar to quercetin, or should we be taking them both or not?
So quercetin and fisetin are both looked at as senolytics, which I described before what senescent cells are. We considered quercetin. It was one of the short list of substances we ultimately were considering for our final formula. And we ultimately decided to exclude it. Part of the reason was that one of our scientific advisory board members is an expert on both of these molecules, a world-renowned expert on it. And it was decided that quercetin, first of all, can have more unintended consequences than fisetin. Fisetin is relatively safe and targeted to senescent cells, whereas quercetin is more likely to have unwanted casualties, so to speak. In other words, to damage healthy cells, especially epithelial cells. So epithelial is like lining, right? So your skin is epithelial, the lining of your blood vessels is epithelial tissue. And so it can actually have a negative effect on those tissues. And so for that reason of, first do no harm, so to speak, we wanted to go with the substance that had the most promising senolytic characteristics and the minimum downsides. And fisetin was decided to be significantly better than quercetin for that reason. Okay. I've experimented with quercetin. I've since stopped taking it since I learned what I did.
Okay. Wow. That's good to know because you do hear so much about it. I read an excellent article on your blog about antioxidants, and these are so popular. Everybody's loading up on antioxidants, and your take on that, or whoever is, be cautious with taking too many antioxidants because it can actually be more harmful than good in the sense it could override your own body's stress response, correct? Could you talk about that a little bit? And specifically mention alpha lipoic acid because I was surprised because I had been taking that for years because after reading, making a good brain great and different things and anti-aging, I started taking it, but now I'm a little nervous with that since I've read your research.
Yeah, sure. So antioxidants, first it's important to note that there are two different types of antioxidants. So there are antioxidants that actually cause oxidation, and then the end result is that the body comes back with a better defense, and then in other words the body produces its own endogenous or its own antioxidants like glutathione or superoxide dismutase and so on. And then there's the more pure form of an antioxidant, the way most people think about it, like a vitamin E, for example, where it is literally intercepting pro-oxidative molecules, free radicals, and neutralizing them. So what I'll focus on is the idea of the latter type, the ones that are intercepting these free radicals. The issue with it is that initially, decades ago, it was believed that oxidation from free radicals was causing the aging process by damaging DNA and then leading us to get older. And we've since learned that that's not the case. DNA damage plays a role in aging, but it's very small compared to the macro picture of all of these mechanisms working together. Inflammation is not always a bad thing. In fact, sometimes it's a good thing. An example is exercise. When you exercise, you're causing inflammation. The body then recognizes that inflammation and comes back building itself stronger. And it only recognizes that because there are these pro-inflammatory molecules that are being sensed, and the body reacts to that by coming back to repair the damage. When you intercept those molecules, you're preventing the data from being transmitted in the form of these molecules. So that's why, for example, studies have found that taking vitamin C and vitamin E, large doses of it in close proximity to your exercise, actually blunted the effects of exercise. So that idea of hormesis that I was talking about before is essentially what antioxidants can prevent from happening. When you think about there being an inflammatory environment, if you are in a constant inflammatory environment, then that's causing too much damage and too much inflammation, right? And chronic inflammation is something that needs to be dealt with, but that's more of a medical condition that needs to be looked into. For example, obesity can cause chronic inflammation, right? Heart disease can cause chronic inflammation. Those are things that need to be looked into. But if you're in an otherwise healthy state, blunting the signals that are being created by otherwise healthy living and doing so too much can actually have a negative effect because your body isn't getting stronger. It's not building up its own antioxidant defenses. It's not repairing the damage that's being done, and so on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you include vitamin C in your supplements or no?
So vitamin C is interesting. It really depends on the dosage that you're taking in and when you're taking it. And so we include a small amount of vitamin C, but we're not including the vitamin C for the antioxidant effects. We're including it because of the synergistic effects that it has on other ingredients, especially the alpha-ketoglutarate. So research has found that when vitamin C is combined with alpha-ketoglutarate, it amplifies the effects, the positive effects of the alpha-ketoglutarate. And it's a relatively small dose that we include. Specifically, I can tell you here, it's only 100 milligrams.
Okay. Is there, just to talk about the supplements really quick, is there anyone that should not be taking these supplements, or do you feel like they're safe for everyone and at all ages? Obviously adult, but is there anybody that should be avoiding it?
Yeah, I mean, I for FDA reasons, I can't, recommend this for people who are diseased. For example, if you're a cancer patient or if you're pregnant and nursing, like we can't go as far as recommending it to people in these specific circumstances. But if you're otherwise healthy person, then yes, we would recommend it to anyone who's healthy and as young as, in your teens, if you like. We have, believe it or not, some customers in their teens who are longevity enthusiasts from an early age. When people ask, like, is it too late to take it if I'm in my 60s, or is it too early to take it if I'm 18 years old? Mm-hmm. The answer to that is it's similar to exercise or eating healthy. The sooner you start, the better. Mm-hmm. But there's no point at which it's too late to begin. So if you're 70 years old and you've never exercised or ate healthy, you can significantly improve your lifespan by suddenly exercising and eating healthy. The same applies to taking these types of ingredients that have been shown to improve health span and lifespan. It's never too late or too early.
Okay. What are the top longevity habits that you feel are most important that you want everybody should be doing these?
Sure. So one of the things I didn't mention about Novos before is that we're a public benefit corporation, and I intentionally founded the company in this way so that we can not always look to profit and making shareholders do well, but also for us to just make the world a better place. Mm-hmm. And so as part of that, you mentioned earlier, we have a lot of content on our website. That's part of that initiative. We also donate money to science and for awareness of longevity and so on. But that content, a lot of those articles go into things that you can do for free without buying Novos. Mm-hmm. So some of those things, I would say, beyond using our product is, first and foremost, one of the best things you can do is fasting. So whether that be in the form of intermittent fasting or prolonged water fasting, both of them have their benefits. Intermittent fasting is a good habit to get into on a daily basis. So for those who don't know, that's the idea of only eating within a certain time window and then not eating for the remainder. So for example, I do what's called a 16-8. I eat for 8 hours during the day and I fast for 16. It's not nearly as hard as it sounds. I basically eat from 12 noon until 8 p.m. Mm. And so it's basically skipping breakfast. Mm. Some people go beyond that. Some people have one meal a day. That personally doesn't work for me in my work life schedule. But the smaller eating window, typically the better, as long as you're getting enough calories. The prolonged water fasts are when you go without any food for, say, 24 hours or longer. And for that, I try to do once per quarter as long as 72-hour fast. That is actually more challenging, significantly more challenging than the intermittent fasting. But there are some hacks to make it easier. And that's when you really start seeing a lot of the longevity benefits coming into play, is at around the 72-hour mark. So that's why I try to get it to that 3-day point.
Yeah. Have you ever tried that longevity prolong, that mimicking diet from Dr. Valter Longo? Have you ever done that?
I'm very aware of it, but I haven't personally tried it.
I haven't either, but I've been thinking about it because that would be nice if it really works, because it's hard to fast long-term, longer. But as far as autophagy, I've read all different things. So you think around the 72-hour point is the point where that really kicks in? Yeah,
72, like a lot of research and even people in the space like Dr. Peter Attia, who does his own personal accounts and measures a lot of biomarkers. It's found that around the 72-hour mark is where a lot of the longevity benefits really kick into place. So, okay. I would recommend that. Okay.
So we got fasting, obviously sleep.
Yes. So sleep is tremendously important. It's I think in American society, it's not emphasized enough. Like there's a lot of pride associated with, at least in the circles that I come from in my career, like working late nights and working weekends and pulling all-nighters and so on. Like there's this badge of pride that like you work so hard, but it's actually not good for you. Sleep is one of the most critical aspects of health, right? So diet, activity, and when I say diet, I include fasting and when you eat. activity, exercise, and so on, and then sleep are like three cornerstones of health span and lifespan. There's associative studies that find that people that have sleep deprivation have higher chances of getting Alzheimer's and dementia. So it's something that adds up over time. There's a reason that every single species known to man sleeps, right? This is the period where we're cleaning things out, we're fixing things, we're repairing. We're consolidating memories. There's so many different things that happen during this period, and if we're not getting enough of it, and we're waking up tired and then caffeinating ourselves, we're just wearing ourselves down, and probably. I would go as far as venturing a guess. I don't have direct evidence of this, but if you looked at an epigenetic test, which essentially measures biological age of someone compared to their chronological age, I bet you those who are sleep deprived have older biological ages than those who are getting appropriate amounts of sleep.
Yeah, I believe that. And just the hormones involved as well, especially. It's a crazy, once I learned about, all the different hormone regulation, it's like, wow, all those years I didn't sleep. I was not doing myself any favors. Speaking on biohacking real quick, for those that don't know what it is, talk a little bit about it, those biological clocks, and then what your company offers as far as testing.
Sure. So the concept of biohacking is simply the idea of trying to hack, so to speak, your biology. So to bring it to a different place, a more ideal place. So different people have different ideals. Some people, they want to biohack their way to improved athletic performance. Some people want to have better concentration or memory. I consider myself more of like a longevity hacker. I want to improve my health span and lifespan as much as possible without having a significant negative impact on my lifestyle or any negative impact on my here and now, my ability to function and my biology. In terms of biological clocks, the idea is that we have a chronological age. This is the number of times that the Earth has revolved around the sun, right? How many days we've been alive or years we've been alive. And then there's a concept called a biological age, which is essentially how old are we biologically. The age that we are biologically correlates to mortality risk, for example, or the risk of illness, and how you feel and look and perform is associated with your biological age. And so people that smoke cigarettes continuously, for example, I believe the average is 7 years older biologically than they are chronologically. Whereas people who have a normal, relatively healthy life, they're typically biologically equal to their chronological age. I'm very fortunate in that I've gotten a number of tests done for myself. And there are many different clocks out there. There's no one definitive clock, but there are many different kinds. And looking at all of them, my biological age is significantly younger than my chronological age. So I'm nearly 38. My biological age, according to a trusted clock, is nearly 11 years younger. Wow. The laboratory that did the study said they've never seen results like this before. Wow. My telomere age, which is less reliable, but these are the end caps of the DNA that I mentioned earlier. That's the equivalent of a 24-and-a-half-year-old. And wow. My extrinsic biological age, which is essentially it's considered to be your immune system age. So how young is your immune system, was 19 and a half. Wow. And then finally, my pace of aging, this is one of the most accurate clocks out there, is 0.75, which means that every 1 year chronologically, I'm aging 3/4 of a year. So that's the combination of eating healthy, sleeping well, lifestyle, and I believe taking Novos products have brought me to this point.
Wow, that's impressive. One thing I meant to ask you about the diet, there is so much on protein, and everything I tend to read on longevity says you don't want to overload yourself with protein. So when I mentioned that, I've gotten hit so hard. So I would love to just know your opinion on that from a longevity perspective.
Yes. So there's two perspectives from which to look at this. If you consider as you get older, you have a higher chance of sarcopenia, which is muscle loss. So in your senior years, you need to be cognizant of that. Mm-hmm. But then you also need to think of overall, how does protein as molecules that are essentially data coming into our body. How does this data then impact the aging process? And so, for example, if you have a very high protein diet throughout your life, especially animal forms of protein, because animal forms of protein are higher in proteins like methionine, they are more likely to activate mTOR that we mentioned earlier. You can accelerate the aging process. So there's a happy medium. You need adequate protein to be able to maintain your muscle mass, but you don't want to overshoot that and have too much. For example, having a steak every night and eating a lot of protein with every meal, you're probably overdoing it. I exercise a lot. I weigh 170 something pounds. I've been able to deadlift triple my body weight. I can bench press nearly 300 pounds. And I only take in about 100 to 120 grams of protein. When I was younger and I started, reading Men's Health magazine, like I mentioned earlier, I thought I had to take in like 2 grams of protein per pound. So like I would need to take in like, 300 grams of protein or something. That's absurd. I'm living proof that you can go much lower on the protein, maintain your muscle mass, and then still have a more positive impact on longevity by not over-activating things like mTOR.
That makes total sense to me. And obviously your markers are proving that. Was there anything I didn't ask you that you feel is important to cover?
That's a good question. Nothing immediately comes to mind. Well, I guess a couple of things. If your audience is interested, they can learn more about the science of aging on our website, on our blog, novoslabs.com/blog. If they're interested in learning more about how we formulated our products like Novos Core, we take a very different approach than practically any supplement company out there ever has. You can go to novoslabs.com/how, and there we describe the filters that we put all of the ingredients through before we arrive at our patent pending formulas that we create.
Are they capsules? Is it one like a powder, or what is it?
Yeah, so Novos Core, this is what it looks like. This is the box. This is actually the new version that we're now releasing. We rebranded, and you'll see a new website starting in April. And then here is a sachet of Novos Core. So it's a powdered drink mix. We intentionally made it as a drink mix because otherwise, if you were to buy this on Amazon, for example, all of the ingredients, it would require 15 pills. And it would cost about 60% more than what we charge for this product. It has 0 calories. It's vegan, gluten-free. It's sweetened with stevia and erythritol and orange flavored. You pour it in your water and you drink one of these a day. Novos Boost is a tiny little pill.
Okay. Do you take them both together in the morning?
You can take it in the morning. I personally take it with my first meal, and my first meal is at noon. So that's when I take it. And I actually try to spread it out. I try to have it over the course of a few hours. So I'll have like maybe a third of it with lunch, and then the remainder as the day progresses.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for all this great knowledge. It's been great talking with you and learning more about your company. And you guys are doing some great things. It's awesome.
Thank you. We're just getting started. So I'm excited for a lot of the things that we're going to bring to the market between the information, the longevity test, which we didn't cover, but we will have a biological age test in the months ahead, and then additional formulations will eventually release.
Awesome. Sounds good. Talk to you later. Thank you.
All right. Of course. Thank you. Bye.